Ateapi chihintguki, na wonia wakanki he, wakantanka wajina ki, he wawita yuha nue. Amen. I'm Bradley Hauff. I live in Minnesota, but I'm originally from South Dakota. If you don't know where South Dakota is, it's south of North Dakota. My last name is spelled H-A-U-F-F, H as in hotel, A as in alpha, U as in uniform, and 2 F's as in my high school report card. I'm just kidding. Not about South Dakota. That really is south of North Dakota. I am enrolled in the Oglala Sioux tribe, as were both my parents. You just heard me pray the doxology in the Lakota Sioux language, and I greet you with the Lakota words, How Mutakiepi. How Mutakiepi. Translated into English, this means, Hello, relatives. The Lakota people greet one another with these words, and not just fellow human beings. To the Lakota, as with virtually all indigenous people, everyone and everything exist in a state of relationship. People, animals, fish, birds, insects, and every living thing, and even that which to the mind of Western civilization is not living, winds, rocks, and the stars and planets of the cosmos. When Lakota people pray, or whenever we speak, we typically conclude with the phrase, Mitakwasi, Mitakwasi, which means, all my relatives, all my relatives. To indigenous people, the universe is a living being, alive and well. The earth and the cosmos in its entirety are our relatives. They are not our possessions to exploit any more than one of your relatives would be. Think of it, all that is your relative. If you haven't yet seen things that way, think of how it would change your life and your world if you did. It would turn your world upside down. I am the missioner for Indigenous Ministries for the Episcopal Church and a member of Presiding Bishop Michael Curry's staff. Please know that you are in the Presiding Bishop's prayers and that he is grateful for your work in the Diocese of Olympia as faithful and active participants in the Jesus movement. The Jesus movement is not an institution, but a spiritual and social revolution in the name of Christ. There are 3 aspects of this movement that I want to highlight today: loving, liberating, and life-giving. Loving, liberating, and life-giving. Perhaps some of you have heard these before. These 3 things categorize or characterize the Christian faith and life so well. Anyone or anything that is loving as God loves, anyone or anything that liberates the oppressed, whether the source of the oppression is outside of us or from within ourselves, anyone or anything that gives life to the world, loving, liberating, and life-giving. Another thing we see and experience in the Jesus movement is a diversity of people from all backgrounds, colors, languages, and cultures. Dr. King referred to this as the beloved community, a celebration of the racial and ethnic diversity of our church. His dream of humankind as a beloved community, described by the King Center, is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Our church is diverse. Our church has circles of color, and we must recognize and honor that. I am pleased to be with you on this day, albeit virtually. I appreciate the extensive indigenous heritage and presence in Northwest Washington, as well as the beauty of the mountains, the forests, and the waters there. My office has had its annual Winter Talk conference in the Seattle-Tacoma area for the past 2 years, and it has always been a joy to be there. My thanks to Bishop Rickle and the diocesan staff for inviting and working with me. Before joining the Presiding Bishop's staff, I spent 27 years in congregational ministry. I've lived in a number of cities, large cities. As you know, crime is a big problem in many of our metro areas. And I lived in a city a few years ago where my car was broken into 4 times, and the house where I was living was broken into once. I could hardly believe it. And each time I was burglarized, and I'm not making this up, each time I was burglarized, the burglars took nothing. Nothing. Not one thing. So after this happened a few times, I started to feel really awful. Not that my place was broken into, but why didn't they want my stuff? Is it that bad? Why didn't they want my stuff? I don't know. It was embarrassing after a while having to tell the police, yeah, they didn't take anything again. You see, when I get burglarized, I want it to be a burglary I can be proud of. I want to be able to say, yes, my place was broken into and they took everything. They wanted it all because they know I have the best stuff. But my ego issues aside, and all kidding aside, stealing is a terrible thing. When things are taken from us, we feel violated, exploited, and hurt. And then we get angry. That's a normal response. And there are small things that can be stolen and large things. Indigenous Native Americans have been dealing with this on a large scale, a very large scale, for many years. Our land was stolen. More than that, our identity was stolen. Our very understanding of who we are and how we see the world was stolen. Last Sunday's gospel reading, if you remember, was from Matthew, and it's the story about Jesus being challenged by the Pharisees and the Herodians regarding the payment of taxes to the emperor. Jesus asks for a coin and asks whose head and title are on it. And then he gives his answer, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. As many times as I've read this passage and preached on it over the years, I've found that, like in virtually all of the gospel stories, there is more than one way of understanding it. That is the beauty and the genius of the gospel. That's what makes the gospel a living story and not just a fixed record of something that happened a long time ago. And it opens the door to a number of possibilities, including the understanding of Jesus as a native or indigenous Messiah. I'll say more about that later. One way of understanding this passage is that there is a separation of church and state, a dichotomy of sacred and secular. That would seem to be in accordance with the way things are here in the United States. It is apparently consistent with our Constitution. It is not, however, consistent with the indigenous worldview. We don't recognize a dichotomy of sacred and secular. To us, everything is sacred. There is no such thing as a material world that is not spiritual as well. To the indigenous, all of life and everything that is in it is spiritual. But there are things that are considered unacceptable in this type of worldview. The idea that anyone can own the earth is one. The idea that any one nation can justifiably dominate another is also one. An indigenous interpretation of this gospel passage from Matthew would be that oppression and colonization in all their forms are to be rejected, repudiated, right down to the face and title of the emperor on the coin. The indigenous interpretation would be, give this abomination back to whom it belongs. It is his, he can have it. It doesn't belong in the world that we know. Part of why I'm here with you today is to talk about a larger abomination. And as I do this, I have to clarify that I don't speak for the Episcopal Church. I am not the voice of the Church. But I am familiar enough with the resolutions of our General Convention, the body that does speak for us, to know that there are things we need to acknowledge, things for which we must take responsibility. And this has to do with how our indigenous people have been treated since 1492, and the Church's role in it. It all began with the doctrine of discovery, something that most people have never even heard about. Originating in the late 1400s, the doctrine of discovery consists of various edicts and manifestos, initially from the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, which influenced the objectives of Columbus and his successors, and was later enforced by other religious and national leaders, including the monarchs of England. The decrees, known as Dum Diversas from 1452, Romanus Pontifex from 1454, and Inter Cetera from 1493, eventually became known by historians as the doctrine of discovery. This doctrine gave the Church's sanction to the seizure of land and subjugation of the indigenous residents of Africa, the Western Hemisphere, and the world under the claim of a right of domination by a Christian nation over non-Christian people and their land, under a conviction of divine right and the guise of evangelism. The intent of the doctrine of discovery can be summarized as a blessing on the dispossession of land, wholesale theft, slavery, and enforced indoctrination, all in the name of God for the perceived good of the world. Within these documents, which came out of the Church, the foundation for the slavery of African people was laid. In the centuries that followed, the objectives of the doctrine of discovery became known in the United States as manifest destiny, and the Western Hemisphere, once populated by tens of millions of indigenous people of many nations and tribes, with their own languages, social customs, and spiritual expressions, was utterly devastated. Entire tribes were wiped out due to murder, pestilence, famine, and deportation. It was the beginning of the Black Lives Don't Matter movement. It was the beginning of the Indigenous Lives Don't Matter movement. You see, land theft and the removal of people from their homeland murder a culture and a people. Genocide, colonization, and slavery make them disappear as if they were never there. Unlike the characteristics of Christianity, this theft was not loving. It was based very much in hate and greed. It was not liberating. It was the opposite, the worst and longest-lasting oppression in human history to the present day. It was not life-giving. Millions of African, African-American, and indigenous lives were taken. Not lost, but taken. It was and is sin. One person whose life was directly affected by all this was my father. From age 5 to age 18, my father was raised in a residential school operated by the federal government on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. This practice of raising indigenous children was commonly done in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in this country. It was a method of assimilating them into the dominant general culture of the United States. Captain Richard Henry Pratt of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School of Pennsylvania, the flagship Indian residential school, described it as killing the Indian in order to save the man. I remember my father telling me what it was like for him. After his arrival at the school, he said, every evening he would go down to the front gate, an iron gate, and wait. He would wait, he said, wait for someone to come and take him home. He did this every evening for about a year. Then he concluded that the somebody he was waiting for wasn't coming. So he cried. He told me he would cry into his pillow at night so no one would hear him. Because you didn't dare show grief or sadness or fear at the boarding school. If you did, you would be beaten up. Eventually, he became angry, and that anger stayed with him for most of his life. When he became a parent, he really didn't know how to be one because he didn't have parenting. He wasn't raised in a family. That was taken from him. His childhood was taken from him. His understanding of who he was as an indigenous child was taken from him. In this country, for over a century, many indigenous children were taken, stolen, just as the land was, It turned their world upside down, and in a way that was cruel, inhumane, and, in a word, evil. For far too long, the Church has regarded indigenous people as heathens, infidels, savages, those in need of salvation, indoctrination, assimilation into the ways of the dominant society. If only the early missionaries from Europe had not had that agenda, think of how different things might have been. They would have seen that God was not an absentee landlord of the Western Hemisphere before their arrival. They would have seen that indigenous people knew God and knew Christ, and that they weren't bringing them much of anything that they didn't already know and have. Indigenous people hadn't heard of the first century Palestinian Jew known as Jesus of Nazareth, but they did have a native understanding of the Christ, the Messiah, found in their own stories and traditions. And they recognized this in Jesus. Jesus embodied core native values and beliefs. If only the missionaries had been open to seeing and knowing this. If only they had been open to native ways of life which honor the two-spirited, empower the leadership of women, and care for the earth as grandmother. If only. Think of what a difference it would have made. I believe, while so much tragedy has taken place, it's not too late for good things to happen. There is a need for healing, and healing can occur. There is a need for transformation, and transformation can take place within us. There is a need for redemption, and there's no better Redeemer than Christ. The key to healing, transformation, and redemption is through reestablishing the cosmic and sacred relationship, by seeing us all as relatives, turning the world upside down and in a good way, a way that is loving, liberating, and life-giving. And it must begin with each of us. It is time, and has been for many years, for all the people of the Christian faith, and all people for that matter, to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. I am proud to say that the Episcopal Church did this in 2009. It is time to recognize that if we teach the false narrative that Columbus discovered America, we are saying that there was nothing here in America, or at least nothing worth acknowledging before his arrival. We are celebrating an individual who initiated the worst and longest-lasting genocide in human history. We are turning a blind eye to slavery and Jim Crow. No, it is time to turn this worldview upside down. God was and is present with indigenous people, and black people, and brown people, and Asian people, people of all colors and cultures and languages. Always has been, always will be. It is time for the Church to learn from the wisdom of people of color, and for all of us to commit ourselves to living in right relationship with God, humanity, and all of creation. It is time for all of humanity's circles of color to have a place at the table, acknowledging that the table has always been owned by the descendants of Europeans who were colonizers. One time when I was discussing these issues with a small group, a non-native man, aggressively asked, "What's it going to do? What's it going to take to satisfy you people? What do you want us to do? We're not giving the land back." Indigenous people know that. We know the land is not going to be given back, and we are not interested in trying to take it back. Now, there are instances where treaties need to be honored. Even the United States Constitution indicates that treaties between nations are the law of the land and no other law supersedes them. But indigenous people are not interested in taking away anyone's home, because we know what it's like to lose a home. We wouldn't wish it on anyone. What we do want and deserve, I believe, is recognition, remembrance, and reconciliation. We want to be seen and known. We were here, yes, and we still are. Something that can be done that is very achievable is a land acknowledgement. Some congregations and dioceses have been doing these for the past few years. A land acknowledgement, if you're not familiar with it, is an acknowledgement of the indigenous tribe that used to live on the land that you are currently living. And there isn't an acre of land in what is now known as the United States that wasn't the home of an indigenous tribe at one time, before it was taken from them, or before they were removed from it. The tribe is acknowledged. The name is said. Say the name. And then it is acknowledged that this was their home before it was taken from them. And then thanks is given for them and their example of honor and humility. They are prayed for wherever they may be today, and a desire for justice and reconciliation is expressed and affirmed. Now, I live in Minnesota, so here's an example of how a land acknowledgement would be written where I am currently living. We remember and honor the indigenous people of North and South America, in particular the Dakota and Anishinaabe Ojibwe nations, whose land that we now occupy in this region was once their home and it was taken from them. We give thanks for them and express our gratitude for their witness on how to live a life that is honorable and humble. May we always remember that the earth does not belong to us, that we belong to the earth, and that we are all relatives in this life. Help us to learn from our past mistakes and be instruments of justice and peace for all people in today's world. That's an example of a land acknowledgement. And this can be done at the beginning of a service, during announcements as part of the prayers of the people, or in the bulletin, newsletter, or on a website or social media page. This can and should be done. It's not difficult to do. And it can go a long way, because if we don't acknowledge what happened, we stop telling the story. And when the story is silenced, people will forget about it and even deny that it ever happened. We can't allow for this. The story must be told, and the church can help with that, and we should, because it's the story of all of us. Acknowledgement is the beginning of reparations for what has happened and how it has affected groups of people over time. Our African American brothers and sisters have asserted this issue very well. Sometimes, when people consider reparations, the response is, "We can't afford that. We don't have that kind of money." Well, sorry, but this country certainly became wealthy on the backs of African American slaves and stolen native land. But reparations are not primarily about the issue of money and financial compensation. Reparations are about acknowledging wrong, working for restoration in all its forms, in particular relationships, recognizing that equitable provisions, and not just equality, are necessary for people of color who have been oppressed for centuries to have a place at the table. Reparations are about owning up to one another as family. I want to say that I stand with you as your brother and with you as my Christian family. We're not perfect, but we are in this together. And I pray that during this pandemic and time of national crisis, when so many of us are tired and sad and lonely and fearful and hurting and angry, we will stand together. Stand together for justice. Stand together for peace. Stand together for healing. Stand together for reconciliation. Stand together for love. Stand together for liberation. Stand together for the giving of life. We are the family of God. We are the beloved community. We are all related. So let's turn the world upside down, and in a good way. Mitakwasi.